Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
In a world increasingly shaped by digital connections, there's a constant, often invisible battle being waged right beneath our fingertips. Every click, every online transaction, every connected device potentially opens a door to something, well, unexpected.
Yeah, it really does. It's a landscape that, for many of us, feels abstract, almost like a secret war, as you say.
Exactly. But what is this war, really? Where do we even begin to get a handle on it?
That's a fantastic way to frame it, because at its core, cybersecurity isn't just about protecting computers. Not really.
Okay.
It's truly about building a robust digital fortress around your most valuable assets, your critical data, and your entire IT infrastructure,
Well,
shielding them from what we call bad actors.
bad actors, right.
Think of it as the tireless, never-ending effort to keep the digital barbarians from the gate.
A digital fortress. I like that analogy.
Mm.
But fortresses aren't just one big wall, are they?
No, not at all.
It must be incredibly complex to build and maintain something like that, especially against an invisible enemy.
Absolutely.
Today, our mission is to embark on a deep dive into this sometimes unsettling but always fascinating world of cybersecurity threats and attacks.
And our goal is really to quickly get you well informed, whether you're, navigating complex business networks, simply browsing online, or maybe just intensely curious about what's lurking in the digital shadows.
Yeah, make it accessible.
Exactly. We promise to equip you with surprising facts and hopefully a clearer understanding of this absolutely crucial landscape.
We're going to pull back the curtain on the what, the who, the how, and the why of cyber attacks, making these complex concepts easy to grasp with plenty of real-world context. So let's start by really defining our battlefield. What is cybersecurity, and perhaps even more critically, what's truly at stake when it fails?
That's the perfect starting point. As we touched on, cybersecurity is the practice of protecting an organization's IT infrastructure and its most critical data from those bad actors. It's an ongoing active defense. You can't just set it up once.
Right. And how is this digital fortress actually built? It's not just one piece of software you install and you're done, right?
No, not at all. It's a complex blend. It's achieved through sophisticated technologies, think firewalls, encryption tools, intrusion detection systems, things like that.
The technical stuff.
Right. But it's equally reliant on robust internal control processes, like how employees are granted access or how data is handled within the organization.
Okay, so procedures matter too.
Hugely. And crucially, it depends on diligent adherence to best practices, ensuring everyone, from the CEO down to the newest intern, understands their role in maintaining security. It's really a multi-layered defense.
Makes sense.
The ultimate goal, the very reason cybersecurity exists, is to manage and mitigate cybersecurity risks by securing and enhancing three core pillars.
The famous CIA triad. Let's spell those out because they are absolutely foundational to understanding any cybersecurity discussion. First up, we have confidentiality.
Right. Confidentiality means keeping sensitive information private. Simple as that, really.
So only the right eyes see it.
Exactly. This is about ensuring that data is accessed only by authorized individuals or systems. If your confidential customer lists, your proprietary formulas, or, personal health records fall into the wrong hands, that's a breach of confidentiality.
Like someone reading your diary.
Precisely. Imagine your private diary being read by a stranger. That's confidentiality violated.
Got it. Then there's data integrity. What does that encompass, and why is it so vital?
Data integrity is about ensuring that data is accurate, complete, and importantly, untampered with.
Untampered.
Okay. Imagine if someone maliciously altered your financial records, changing account balances, or maybe secretly tweaked the specifications on a crucial engineering blueprint for a bridge.
Oh, yeah.
That compromises data integrity, and it can have catastrophic consequences for operations, decision-making, and public trust. It's not just about stopping theft. It's about preventing sabotage or misinformation that could basically destroy a business from within.
So data needs to be trustworthy.
Absolutely trustworthy.
And finally, availability. This one seems straightforward, just making sure things are working, but I guess it's often overlooked until it's gone.
Exactly. It's the one you notice immediately when it breaks. Availability means making sure systems and data are accessible and functional when needed by authorized users.
So uptime.
Pretty much. If your website goes down for hours during a major sales event, or your payment system crashes right before a holiday, or even if your employees just can't access their work files, that's an availability issue. It can bring an entire business to a complete halt.
Right.
So a robust cybersecurity program is designed to protect all three, ensuring the secrecy of your data, confidentiality, the accuracy of your data, integrity, and the constant access to your data when needed, availability.
CIA. Okay, so why does all this matter beyond just being a technical abstract concept? What's the real cost when a cyber attack succeeds? Because we hear about breaches all the time, but the true impact, I feel like it goes so much deeper than just the headline.
Oh, absolutely. The impact of a successful cyber attack can be absolutely staggering for both organizations and, individuals caught up in it. We're talking about both tangible monetary losses,
The dollars and cents.
right, the direct costs, and intangible non-monetary losses. And often those intangible ones are the most devastating in the long run.
Okay, give us some examples of those tangible monetary costs. Where do businesses really feel the pinch in their wallets?
Well, on the monetary side, you're looking at immense recovery costs. That's the expense of just bringing systems back online, investigating the breach to figure out what happened, how bad it is.
The cleanup crew.
Exactly. And remediating vulnerabilities to prevent it from happening again. Then there are potential fines from regulators, which can be huge, legal fees from class action lawsuits if customer data was involved, and even the cost of offering things like credit monitoring services for affected customers.
That adds up fast.
It really does. Did you know the average cost of a data breach globally now exceeds $4 million?
$4 million. Wow.
And that's just the average. For some companies, it's been an extinction-level event, literally put them out of business.
That's a staggering figure. And the non-monetary losses, you mentioned, those often hit harder in the long run. How do you even put a price on trust?
You really can't. And they absolutely do hit hard. Non-monetary losses include severe reputation damage, a significant loss of customer trust, and major disruptions of work with customers, vendors, partners, basically everyone you deal with.
The whole ecosystem.
The whole ecosystem. Imagine your customers hearing their sensitive data was stolen from you. Regaining their trust is an uphill battle, if not impossible sometimes. Competitors can swoop in, and your brand can be permanently tarnished. It's a real crisis of confidence.
Yeah, that's tough to come back from. So when you talk to executives, what are the top security concerns that keep them up at night? Because these are the highest level risks we're really trying to mitigate, right?
Exactly. These are the big ones. The source identifies 3 paramount concerns for senior executives charged with IT governance. The first, and perhaps the one you hear about most in the news, is data breaches.
Yeah, seems like almost daily. What exactly constitutes a data breach and what makes it so dangerous?
Well, a data breach occurs when information is compromised and then used without the owner's authorization.
Okay, so unauthorized use.
Right. This means sensitive data, whether it's personal information, financial records, intellectual property, even national secrets, gets into the hands of someone who shouldn't have it. The danger isn't just the loss of the data itself, but what happens next, the subsequent misuse. Identity theft, financial fraud, industrial espionage, or even state-sponsored intelligence gathering.
And what kinds of attacks typically lead to these breaches? What are the common entry points?
Common culprits include ransomware, which, encrypts data until a payment is made.
We'll definitely talk more about that one.
Oh, yeah. Phishing, where attackers trick users into revealing information or clicking bad links. Malware, which is basically malicious software designed to infiltrate systems and steal data. And of course, something as simple as compromised passwords. Often, that's the front door just left unlocked.
It's amazing how often it comes back to passwords.
It really is. Basic hygiene matters.
Okay, the second major concern for executives, service disruptions. This sounds like something that just halts business operations, almost like a digital strike.
That's exactly right. Service disruptions are basically unplanned events that cause a general system or a major application to become inoperable for an unacceptable length of time.
So things just stop working.
Pretty much. This can literally grind an entire business to a halt, prevents them from serving customers, processing internal functions, manufacturing goods, even communicating. Think of it as a digital blackout for your core operations.
What usually causes these kinds of disruptions, and how do they differ from, say, a data breach? Is it about stealing or stopping?
Good distinction. Again, malware can be a cause if it corrupts or disables systems, but more famously, distributed denial of service, or DDoS, attacks are specifically designed for disruption. They just overwhelm systems with traffic.
Flooding the gates.
Precisely. SQL injections, which we'll get into, and various password attacks can also lead to critical service outages by locking out legitimate users or maybe corrupting necessary system functions. So yeah, while a data breach is about exfiltration data leaving the building, so to speak, service disruption is about inoperability. The systems just aren't working.
Got it. And the third major concern, compliance risk. This one sounds like it hits the bottom line directly through penalties and legal entanglements.
It absolutely does. Compliance risk refers to the failure to adhere to cybersecurity regulations mandated by various governing bodies. When organizations fall short, they face significant fines, financial penalties, and often legal action that can compound the initial cost dramatically. It's not just about doing the right thing ethically, it's about avoiding massive legal and financial repercussions.
Can you give us some examples of these crucial regulations that businesses absolutely must comply with? The big names we hear about.
Certainly. There's HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is critical for protecting patient health information in the U.S.
Right, healthcare.
Then there's GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. That's the big European privacy law, but it has global implications for any company handling data from EU citizens.
Affects everyone, pretty much.
Almost everyone online, yeah. PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, applies to any organization that handles credit card information.
So retail e-commerce.
Exactly. And ISO IEC 27001 is an international standard for information security management systems, providing a framework for best practices. Failing to comply with any of these can be incredibly costly, both in direct fines and in the broader fallout, like reputational damage again.
It really sounds like an unending battle. You just fix one vulnerability and something new pops up, or the attackers just evolve their methods. It's relentless.
That's the core challenge, absolutely, and it's why we describe it as a constant digital chess game.
Yeah.
To combat these ever-present threats, organizations need to develop robust, comprehensive programs for mitigating cybersecurity risks. This isn't a set-it-and-forget-it kind of task. It requires continuously developing innovative security measures, constantly updating existing systems, and educating personnel to keep pace with the rapidly evolving technology landscape and the even more rapidly evolving tactics of the threat actors.
It's a race.
It's a constant, dynamic struggle, not a one-time fix. You're always adapting.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork for understanding what cybersecurity is and why it's so vital. Now let's dive into the core of it. What exactly is a cyber attack, and who are the people behind them? We need to understand the players and their motivations, their methods.
Right, and what's fascinating here is how broad the definition of a cyber attack truly is. It's essentially any malicious activity that targets computer information systems, infrastructures, computer networks, or even your personal computer devices.
So pretty much anything digital.
Anything digital can be a target. It's an intentional act to cause harm or gain illicit access in the digital realm.
And what are these attackers trying to achieve? What are their ultimate objectives when they launch these attacks? Is it always money?
Not always, though that's a big driver. Their objectives are varied, but they generally fall into categories like collecting sensitive information for theft or espionage.
Spying or stealing secrets.
Right. Disrupting operations to cause chaos, or maybe extract a ransom, like we mentioned, denying legitimate access to systems, degrading system performance to cripple services, or sometimes outright destroying information system resources or the information itself.
Just pure vandalism almost.
It can be, but it's rarely just for fun anymore. There's almost always an underlying motive, whether it's financial, political, or competitive.
And the impact isn't just on the direct target, is it? You mentioned that ripple effect earlier. It can spread like wildfire through interconnected systems.
That's a crucial point, and it really speaks to the interconnectedness of our digital world. The ripple effect is significant. The impacts of these attacks can directly or indirectly affect the targeted organization, sure, but also its customers, its vendors, and even its partner organizations. One breach can become a domino effect across an entire ecosystem. It's why supply chain security is such a huge topic now.
Makes sense. The source also mentions 6 overarching categories for how these attacks are executed. Can you briefly list those, just to set the stage for where we're going next?
Yes, absolutely. These overarching categories help us classify the vast array of methods used by threat actors. You've got network-based attacks, host-based attacks, social engineering attacks, application-based attacks, physical attacks, and supply chain attacks.
Okay, great.
Each category exploits different vulnerabilities, different entry points.
Perfect, because we're going to dive deep into each of those later. But first, let's talk about the who. Who are these threat agents, as the source calls them? Who are the players on the other side of this digital chessboard?
Okay. A threat agent is fundamentally an internal or external attacker who could negatively impact data security through, theft, manipulation, or control of sensitive information or systems. It's basically the human element behind the malicious activity.
So it's not just some faceless hacker in a dark basement, like in the movies.
Yeah.
There's a whole diverse cast of characters, right?
Yeah.
Each with their own goals, methods, motivations, even levels of sophistication.
Exactly, you nailed it. While there's usually a common goal, maybe financial gain or data destruction, the motivations and the scale of these operations can vary incredibly widely. Let's look at some examples from the source, starting with the broadest category: attacker, threat actor, or hacker.
This sounds like the umbrella term for pretty much anyone doing malicious digital stuff.
It pretty much is. This group includes individuals, acting alone, or even highly organized groups known as hacking rings, or, more formally, advanced persistent threats, APTs.
APTs, yeah, I hear that a lot. Often state-backed.
Often, yeah.
Yeah.
The latter are frequently backed by nation-states. They target people or organizations to gain access to systems, networks, data. Their objectives are incredibly diverse: stealing property, destabilizing businesses, spying on governments, maybe disseminating true or false information, or, as we said, just pure financial gain. They are kind of the general digital criminals.
Okay. Then the source mentions adversaries. How do they differ from a general hacker? Is there a more direct conflict of interest involved?
There usually is, yes. Adversaries are actors whose interests are in direct conflict with the target organization.
Like competitors.
Competitors are a prime example. They are highly incentivized to perform malicious actions because of that conflict, perhaps to gain a competitive advantage, disrupt a rival's operations, or undermine a target for specific strategic reasons. This could include things like intercepting purchases, outright data theft, even tampering with hardware before it's even installed by the target.
Boy, that's devious.
Or initiating social engineering attacks specifically designed to cripple a competitor. Their motivation is often that direct opposition or competition.
And a really significant one these days, making headlines globally. Government-sponsored or state-sponsored actors. The APTs you mentioned often fall here.
Yes, this is where many APTs live. These are threat actors funded, directed, or sponsored by nation-states. Their activities are often about furthering national espionage goals, intellectual property theft on a massive scale, or even destabilizing other nations politically or economically.
High-stakes stuff.
Absolutely. They've been known to steal and exfiltrate huge amounts of intellectual property, highly sensitive government or corporate information, and even funds to support their nation's strategic goals. These are often highly sophisticated operations, very well-resourced, incredibly patient, and difficult to track or attribute definitively, making them particularly dangerous adversaries.
Switching gears a bit, what about hacktivists? These sound like they're driven more by ideology than profit or espionage.
That's generally true. Hacktivists are typically groups of hackers, sometimes loosely affiliated, who operate to promote specific social causes or political agendas. They use hacking as a form of protest or advocacy.
So digital activism.
Yeah, you could call it that. Often defacing websites to spread a message, leaking information they deem important to the public, or launching denial-of-service attacks to disrupt organizations they oppose and draw attention to their cause. Interestingly, the source notes that some hacktivist groups operate on a self-proclaimed moral basis, consciously avoiding targets like hospitals, churches, or other organizations with purely altruistic missions.
A code of ethics. The sorts.
Sort of. They believe their actions shouldn't cause harm to, vulnerable populations, even if they disagree strongly with other entities.
Now, a very insidious threat, because it comes from within the castle walls. Insiders. These are people inside the organization, making them particularly dangerous.
This is absolutely critical and often the most unsettling for organizations. The insider threat comes from within.
Yeah.
Insiders are employees who either, let's say, organically develop malicious intentions over time, maybe due to grievances, feeling overlooked, facing personal hardship that leads to desperation,
Or maybe they're just disgruntled.
or just disgruntled, exactly. Or, and this is also scary, they might be individuals who intentionally infiltrated an organization with nefarious objectives from the very start. Planted moles.
Wow.
They represent a significant internal threat because they operate from within a company's existing safeguards and, crucially, often possess a high level of legitimate access already.
So they have the keys.
They have the keys. Their existing access means they can bypass many of the external defenses that are designed to keep outsiders out. They can often operate undetected for months, sometimes years, making them incredibly dangerous. It's a stark reminder that even your most secure technical systems are only as strong as the human element you trust inside.
That's a chilling thought, the enemy potentially being inside the gates already. You mentioned detecting them. What are some of those subtle shifts in behavior that companies should be acutely aware of beyond just, technical logs?
That's a great question. Beyond just technical logs showing unusual file access, companies often look for behavioral indicators. Things like employees logging in at unusual times, accessing data that's clearly outside their normal job scope, sudden negative changes in behavior or attitude, expressing unusual frustration, or maybe actively trying to circumvent established security protocols. It's really a blend of technical monitoring and human-level behavioral analysis. Requires managers to be observant too.
Makes sense. And finally, the last category here, external threats. This seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's worth defining the vast landscape this covers, I suppose.
Indeed, it's broad but important. External threats are simply those that originate from outside the organization, entity, or individual being targeted by the cyber attack. This encompasses the vast majority of attacks we hear about daily, from those large-scale ransomware campaigns hitting hundreds of businesses, down to individual phishing scams trying to get your personal login details.
So basically everyone else we just talked about, apart from insiders.
Essentially, yes. Understanding this diverse cast of threat agents, the attackers, the adversaries, the state-sponsored groups, the hacktivists, the insiders, and the general external threats is absolutely crucial for developing effective defenses. Because knowing who might attack helps you predict how they might attack and what their likely motivations are. You tailor your defenses accordingly.
Right. Understanding the who informs the how. Okay, speaking of how, let's dive into the fascinating and frankly pretty extensive list of methods cyber attacks employ. Think of this as peeking into their playbook. We're going to break these down by those categories you mentioned earlier, starting with network-based attacks. These are all about targeting the digital infrastructure itself, right? The pipes.
That's right. The pipes, the routers, the servers. These attacks are aimed directly at the core network infrastructure, things like switches, routers, servers, even the physical cabling in some cases, with the intent to gain unauthorized access, disrupt operations for legitimate users, or compromise the very flow of data across the network.
Okay, let's start with backdoors and trapdoors. The source says these aren't quite attacks themselves, but they're crucial enablers, like finding a hidden key to a digital kingdom.
You've got it. That's a good way to put it. Backdoors and trapdoors are methods used to bypass standard security access procedures by creating undocumented entry or exit points to a network or an application.
So a secret way in.
Exactly. Now, trapdoors are often installed intentionally by the system owners or developers themselves, maybe for quick, legitimate access during maintenance, but they can be exploited if discovered by an attacker.
An oversight?
Maybe. Could be. Backdoors, on the other hand, can be intentional, deliberately placed by attackers or maybe rogue developers, or perhaps more dangerously, unintentionally left open due to product defects or simple misconfigurations. They become a blind spot in your security. So while they facilitate the entry, they aren't the attack itself, but rather the vulnerability, the open window that an attacker exploits.
Got it. So they're like hidden emergency exits that attackers can find and use. What about covert channels? This sounds a bit stealthier, almost like a secret code embedded within regular communication.
That's a very good description. Covert channels are mechanisms used to transmit data in ways not originally intended by the system designers. Think of them like secret signals hidden in plain sight.
How does that work?
Imagine you and I are sending letters back and forth, and we know the words themselves are being scanned for secrets, so we can't write anything sensitive. But instead, we agree beforehand to communicate by, say, how long we pause between sending letters. A short pause means yes. A long pause means no. Or maybe by adding a tiny, almost invisible dot to the corner of the envelope.
using the medium itself.
Exactly. It's a way for data to be exchanged outside the official monitored communication path, making it incredibly hard to detect because you're not looking for malicious content, but for subtle variations in behavior.
So it's about exploiting subtle characteristics
Yeah.
of a system's communication, not necessarily breaking into it directly, but using its own rules against it to sneak data out, or maybe commands in.
Precisely. It can be used for both exfiltration and command and control. There are two main types mentioned. Storage channels transmit data by modifying a storage location, maybe a temporary file, or a shared memory space that a party with lower security permission can access and read. And then there are timing channels, which are often harder to spot. Here, the delay or the gap in transmitting data packets is manipulated to hide a transmission. It's about encoding information in subtle timing variations, like, as you hinted, blinking a message in Morse code using the timing of network packets rather than their content.
Wow, that's clever and sneaky. Okay, next up, buffer overflows. This sounds like a program simply getting too much information to handle, like trying to stuff way too many clothes into a small suitcase.
That's a perfect analogy. Attackers essentially overload a program's buffer, which is its temporary storage area for input, with much more input data than it's designed to hold.
And then it breaks.
It can cause the program to overwrite parts of the application's memory it shouldn't, or even crash the program entirely. Critically, once that buffer overflows, the excess data, which the attacker controls, can spill over into areas that dictate program execution. This allows the attacker to inject malicious code or potentially even take complete control of the system. It's a really fundamental vulnerability found in poorly coded software, and it can lead to catastrophic system compromise if exploited successfully.
A classic vulnerability.
Yeah.
This leads right into one we hear a lot about, often making major headlines. Denial of service, DOS, and distributed denial of service, DDoS attacks. These are all about pure disruption, right? Shutting things down.
Absolutely. Pure disruption is the goal. A DOS attack involves a single attacker flooding a target system's network by congesting it with a large volume of traffic, just junk data requests, usually.
Overwhelming it.
Exactly. This flood of traffic exceeds the network's bandwidth capacity, consuming all its resources like processing power and memory, and making it unresponsive to legitimate service requests from real users. It's like calling a busy helpline constantly just to keep anyone else from getting through. And importantly, it often leaves the system vulnerable to further exploitation because it's too busy dealing with the flood to properly defend itself.
And DDoS just scales that up dramatically, hitting from multiple angles at once.
Precisely. DDoS attacks are a much more powerful and much harder to defend against variant. Here, multiple attackers, or more commonly, multiple compromised devices, often a botnet consisting of thousands or even millions of infected computers, servers, or IoT devices, acting like a digital zombie army.
A botnet, right.
They all work in unison to flood an organization's network simultaneously. Because the malicious traffic comes from so many different distributed sources all over the world, it's far harder to block effectively and can be far more devastating than a traditional DOS attack. It's capable of taking down even major websites, financial institutions, or government services. The sheer distributed volume is the weapon.
Terrifying scale. Okay, then we have man-in-the-middle, MITM attacks. This sounds like someone literally inserting themselves into a private conversation, eavesdropping, and perhaps even altering the messages being passed back and forth.
That's precisely the mechanism, yeah. The attacker positions themselves electronically as an intermediary between two communicating parties, say, you and your online bank. They intercept the communications flowing between you.
Without either side knowing.
Ideally, yes. To both parties, the attacker appears to be the legitimate entity they think they're communicating with. But the attacker, sitting in the middle, can read, redirect, or even alter the traffic as it passes through them. Imagine two people talking, but a third person is secretly sitting between them, relaying messages, but maybe changing them slightly as they go. This is particularly common on unsecured public Wi-Fi networks.
A good reason to be careful on public Wi-Fi, then.
A very good reason. Use a VPN.
Okay. What about port scanning attacks? This seems more like a reconnaissance step for attackers, like a burglar systematically checking all the locks and windows on a house before trying to break in.
It absolutely is often a recon step, yeah. Attackers frequently scan target networks for open ports to find vulnerabilities they can exploit later to gain unauthorized access. Now, while computers have physical ports like USB ports, this type of attack specifically focuses on logical ports.
Logical ports.
Yeah, these are virtual endpoints used by network protocols for communication. Think of TCP port 80, which is typically used for standard internet web traffic, or port 443 for secure encrypted web traffic,
Yeah.
HTTPS. There are thousands of these logical ports.
So companies need some ports open to function. But the issue is when they're misconfigured or left vulnerable, leaving a digital door effectively ajar.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Misconfigured open ports, services running on those ports that are unsecured or haven't been patched against known vulnerabilities, maybe weak login credentials protecting those services, or even just poorly configured firewalls that allow access to ports that shouldn't be public. All these create weaknesses. They allow unauthorized access or give attackers a foothold. It's like leaving a window unlocked and slightly open in your digital house, just inviting trouble.
Makes sense. Now, for a truly terrifying one for businesses and individuals alike, and one we've unfortunately seen cripple major organizations, hospitals, cities even, ransomware attacks.
Ransomware is typically a form of malware that, once it gets inside a system or network, locks a user's or a company's operating systems, their applications, and, crucially, their ability to access their own data. Often, it does this by strongly encrypting the files.
So you can't read your own stuff.
Exactly. What makes it particularly insidious is its immediate paralyzing effect. Imagine, as you said, a hospital forced to revert to paper records because all their digital systems are locked. It directly impacts patient care, potentially even lives. Access to the encrypted data or locked systems is then only restored after a ransom, usually demanded in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin to make it harder to trace, is paid to the attackers.
It's basically digital kidnapping of your entire operation.
That's a perfect description. Digital kidnapping. And the sheer audacity and the direct economic pressure are what make it truly unique and frightening for organizations.
So it's not just about stealing data anymore, but essentially holding a business hostage at a fundamental level. That must completely change the game for how companies have to think about recovery and backups, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Recovery shifts dramatically. It's less about just restoring lost data and more about comprehensive business continuity planning. Decisions often involve agonizing choices. Pay the ransom, which funds criminals and offers no guarantee you'll get your data back intact, or accept potentially catastrophic downtime and attempt to rebuild everything from backups, assuming you have good, recent, uninfected backups.
A terrible choice. Okay, what about reverse shell attacks, also called connect back shells? This sounds counterintuitive that the name suggests the victim actually initiates the problematic connection.
That's the clever trick of it, and it makes them incredibly hard for traditional firewalls to detect. In a reverse shell attack, a victim unknowingly runs some code, maybe from a malicious email attachment or a dodgy download that initiates an outbound communication connection from behind the company's firewall to an attacker's waiting server.
So the connection goes out, not in.
Exactly. Because the original contact isn't established from outside the network trying to get in, normal filtering and firewall rules that block incoming connections are often bypassed. This allows the attacker to gain remote control of the victim's machine through this established outbound channel, effectively creating a back door that the victim opened themselves, thinking they were connecting to something legitimate or running a harmless program.
Sneaky. Okay, similar in concept perhaps to man-in-the-middle. We have replay attacks, which the source also calls eavesdropping. This feels like a digital version of recording someone unlocking a door and then using that recording later to open it yourself.
It's precisely that concept, yeah. Replay attacks are actually a specific type of man-in-the-middle attack. A cybercriminal eavesdrops on a secure network communication, maybe between you and a server, intercepts a legitimate data transmission, like your login credentials or a session token.
Captures
Captures it, saves it, and then replays that captured message at a later time to the intended target server to gain network access or perform some unauthorized action like logging in as you. The sinister part is the hacker doesn't necessarily need to decrypt the original message if it was encrypted.
Oh.
Because they've already tapped into the network communications somehow, maybe through that MITM setup, they just capture the encrypted packet containing your valid login attempt and resend the exact same packet later. The server might just see it as another valid login attempt from you. It's chillingly simple and can be very effective against systems that don't properly protect against replays.
That's why things like strong authentication protocols and one-time passwords or tokens are so vital, I imagine, to prevent that reuse.
Exactly. Things that ensure a message or credential is only valid once or for a very short time. Now, moving to something more complex. Return-oriented attacks, or return-oriented programming attacks, ROP for short. This sounds quite sophisticated, almost like building a digital Frankenstein monster, using existing legitimate parts of a program to create something new and malicious. It is quite sophisticated, yes. This is a highly advanced, stealthy technique where attackers don't inject new malicious code into the system, which might be detected by security software. Instead, they cleverly find and resequence existing, legitimate pieces of code already present in the original system's programs or libraries. These small snippets of legitimate code are called gadgets.
Gadget.
Each chosen gadget typically performs a small, useful action, like loading a value into a register, and, crucially, ends with a return instruction. This return instruction, instead of returning normally, is manipulated by the attacker to jump to the next gadget in their carefully crafted sequence. By stringing together dozens or hundreds of these legitimate gadgets in the right order, attackers can carry out complex, malicious operations.
Whoa. So it's incredibly hard to spot because it's using the system's own legitimate code against itself, essentially, rather than bringing in any foreign, obviously malicious elements, like a master chef using only the ingredients already in your pantry to cook up something poisonous.
That's a fantastic analogy, exactly. It bypasses many traditional security measures that primarily look for foreign or anomalous code injections. This makes it a favorite technique of advanced persistent threats, APTs, aiming for stealthy, long-term compromise.
Very clever. Finally, in this network-based attacks category, we have spoofing. This is all about impersonation, right? Putting on a digital disguise to trick systems or people.
Precisely. Spoofing is fundamentally the act of impersonating someone or something legitimate in order to obtain unauthorized system access or trick someone into taking a harmful action. This can involve using falsified credentials or imitating a legitimate person, device, or entity using things like fake IP addresses, fake domain names, or fake email addresses. It's a really fundamental trick in the hacker's playbook used in many different types of attacks.
And the source breaks down a few specific types of spoofing. First, address resolution spoofing, or ARS. This sounds very foundational, dealing with how devices on a local network find each other.
It is very foundational, yeah. It targets the Address Resolution Protocol, ARP, which local networks use. ARS involves falsifying the mapping between a device's unique hardware identifier, its MAC address, which is like a car's permanent vehicle identification number, or VIN.
Okay, the physical address.
Right, the physical hardware address, and its current network location, its IP address, which is more like its temporary street address on the internet or local network. By tricking the network, specifically other devices or the router, into thinking the attacker's MFI address belongs to your IP address, the attackers can redirect messages intended for you to themselves instead. They essentially put a false forwarding address on your digital mail within the local network.
Intercepting your local traffic. Okay. Then there's DNS spoofing, sometimes called DNS cache poisoning. This sounds like tricking your computer into going to the wrong website, even if you type the correct address into your browser.
That's exactly what it aims to do. DNS spoofing involves modifying the domain name system, or DNS records. DNS is like the internet's phone book. It translates human-readable domain names like www.mycompany.com into the numerical IP addresses that computers actually use to connect.
Right.
If an attacker manages to tamper with this DNS mapping, maybe on your computer or on your network's DNS server, or even upstream, they can redirect a victim who types in a legitimate address to a completely different malicious website that they control, but which might look identical to the real one.
A fake login page, for example.
Exactly. The victim, thinking they're on the legitimate site, might then enter usernames, passwords, credit card numbers, or other sensitive information, or maybe even download malicious applications from this fake site. Your browser thinks it's talking to your bank, but it's actually talking to the imposter's server. Very dangerous.
Definitely. And lastly, for spoofing, hyperlink spoofing. This is a super common one we see in phishing attempts where the text of a link looks perfectly fine, but it actually goes somewhere completely different and malicious.
Yes, this is incredibly common. Hyperlink spoofing is simply the alteration of the underlying URL within a hyperlink. The visible text of the link looks legitimate, for example. It might say, click here to view your bank statement, or to show the bank's real domain name.
Looks convincing.
Looks totally convincing. But the hidden underlying URL, the actual destination the link points to, has been changed by the attacker to redirect the victim away from their intended destination and send them to a nefarious location, like that fake login page or a site hosting malware. It's a classic trick in phishing emails because it relies entirely on you not carefully inspecting the actual destination URL before you click. Always hover.
Good advice. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on network attacks. Let's move on now from the network infrastructure itself to talk about application-based attacks. These specifically target the software and websites, right? The very programs and services we interact with every day.
Yes, exactly. These attacks are precisely aimed at vulnerabilities within software or applications, could be desktop software, web applications, databases, websites again, with the goal of gaining unauthorized access, stealing data, or disrupting the application's intended functionality. They exploit weaknesses in the application's code itself rather than the underlying network.
And the first one listed here, structured query language, SQL injection, is an absolute classic. Probably one of the most common and damaging web vulnerabilities out there, isn't it?
It really is. It's been around for decades, but remains incredibly prevalent and effective. And SQL injection occurs when an attacker manages to inject malicious SQL code into existing SQL queries that an application uses to interact with its database.
And SQL is the language databases speak.
Correct. Structured query language. The goal of the injection is usually to gain unauthorized access to the company's sensitive data stored in that database. Now, attackers often don't have direct access to the database server itself.
Right, it's usually protected.
It should be, but they can often manipulate the public-facing web server or web application, which does connect to the database, by injecting their malicious SQL code directly into input fields on the website, like a search box, a login form, or even sometimes just parameters in the URL itself.
So they trick the website into running bad database commands.
That's exactly it. This effectively tricks the web server into executing the attacker's malicious SQL commands against the database. This can allow them to bypass authentication, steal entire tables of data, modify records, delete data, or sometimes even gain administrative control over the database server itself. It's incredibly powerful.
Wow. So they're essentially using the website as an unwitting middleman to attack the database behind it.
Yeah.
What about cross-site scripting? XSS. This sounds somewhat similar in that code is injected, but the source says it targets the users who visit the website, not the database directly. How did that work?
You're right to distinguish that. It's a key difference. While it's similar to SQL injection in the sense that malicious code is injected into a company's website, XSS attacks specifically target the users or visitors of that compromised website rather than the website's server or database.
Okay.
What happens is an attacker injects malicious script code, usually JavaScript, into a web page that other users will view. When an unsuspecting user visits that compromised page, their web browser executes the malicious script as if it were a legitimate part of the website.
And what can that script do?
It runs with the privileges of the website in the user's browser. So it can do things like steal the user's session cookies, allowing the attacker to hijack their logged-in session. It can grab usernames, passwords, or other sensitive information entered into forms on the site. It can redirect the user to other malicious sites or deface the website within their browser. The website itself might not be directly harmed in terms of its data, but its users are definitely compromised, and the site's reputation takes a massive hit.
So the website becomes a vector to attack its own visitors. Nasty. Okay, next we have race conditions. This sounds like exploiting some kind of timing flaw in how a system processes information or performs actions.
It is exactly that. A race condition attack exploits a vulnerability in a system or application that relies on a specific, predictable sequence of operations happening in a certain order.
Like step A must happen before step B.
Precisely. The attacker then tries to force the application to perform two or more of these operations out of their intended order, or perhaps simultaneously, often by sending multiple requests very, very quickly, trying to race the system's normal processing flow.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine an online banking application. Normally, it checks your balance, step A, before allowing a withdrawal, step B. An attacker might try to initiate two withdrawal requests simultaneously, hoping to get both processed before the system has a chance to update the balance after the first withdrawal. By disrupting the intended sequence, like pressing two buttons at the exact same microsecond that are really meant to be pressed sequentially,
I see.
an attacker might gain unauthorized access, maybe bypass a security check, or execute fraudulent acts such as withdrawing money multiple times from an account before the balance check catches up, or maybe overwriting a critical file before a lock is properly applied. It exploits tiny windows of opportunity in the code's execution timing.
Clever. And tricky to defend against, I bet. And then we have the very broad category of mobile code, which includes what we commonly call viruses. These are probably the most well-known type of cyber threat for the average person, right? The thing antivirus software tries to catch.
Absolutely. Mobile code is a general term that refers to any software program specifically designed to move from one computer to another, infecting other legitimate applications or files by altering them in some way to include a version of the malicious code itself. The term virus is the most common example of malicious mobile code, and they come in many different forms, each with its own nasty trick or behavior.
Can you elaborate on those different forms of viruses? The source lists a few, and they seem to behave quite differently.
Sure, let's break them down. An overwrite virus is kind of a blunt instrument. It simply deletes or overwrites the information contained in the files it infects, often making the original file unusable. Removing the virus usually requires the complete deletion of the infected file, meaning data loss.
Destructive.
Very. A multipartite virus is more versatile, maybe more persistent. It uses a mixture of different infection methods. It might try to infect boot sectors and executable files, for example, trying different ways to spread and survive if one method fails or is cleaned up.
Spreads more easily, perhaps.
Potentially, yeah. A parasitic virus is like a digital hitchhiker. It attaches itself to a legitimate program file. It then launches itself into memory when the infected application is launched, gaining the same system rights and privileges as the legitimate program it's attached to. This can make it hard to spot because it piggybacks on trusted software.
Sneaky. What about polymorphic? Sounds like it changes shape.
That's exactly what it does. A polymorphic virus is the chameleon of the virus world. It actively mutates or changes its own code structure or appearance with each new infection while keeping its malicious functionality intact. This makes it much harder for traditional signature-based antivirus software to detect because it never looks exactly the same way twice.
Adapting to survive.
Right. And finally, a resident virus is one that, once executed, installs a copy of itself directly into the computer's main memory, RAM. This allows the virus to remain active and potentially infect other files or monitor system activity even after the original infected program that launched it has been closed. It makes it persistent as long as the computer is on.
Persistent and lurking. Okay, we've covered network attacks and application attacks. Now let's move to host-based attacks, which sound like direct assaults on individual devices, your personal laptop, your phone, or maybe a specific company server.
Exactly. These attacks specifically target a single host. Could be a laptop, a mobile device, a server, anything with its own operating system, with the goal of disrupting its functionality, obtaining unauthorized access to that specific device, or stealing information directly from it rather than attacking the network connection between devices.
Okay. One of the most common and maybe frustratingly simple in concept is brute force attacks. This sounds exactly like what it is, just trying every possible combination until something works.
That's essentially it, yes. Brute force attacks are password cracking schemes where attackers use an automated program or script to systematically attempt to guess a password for an account or system. The program literally tries all possible combinations of potential passwords based on a preset algorithm or character set.
How does it decide what to try?
It can start simply, maybe trying all dictionary words, then common variations, then all lowercase alphabet combinations, then adding uppercase, then numbers, then symbols, then just systematically trying every single possible permutation, character by character. It's a game of sheer computational power and persistence, especially effective against weak, short, or common passwords.
So use strong, unique passwords, folks.
Absolutely, and enable multi-factor authentication wherever possible.
Good tip. Okay, next. A particularly sneaky one, often delivered without you even knowing it's there. Keystroke logging or keyloggers.
Yeah, these are nasty. Keystroke logging involves software, or sometimes even hardware, that tracks and records the exact sequence of keys pressed by a user on a keyboard.
Everything you type.
Everything. The primary purpose is to secretly collect confidential data such as usernames, passwords, credit card numbers, private messages, anything typed as you enter it. These keyloggers are often delivered as Trojan horses malware disguised as legitimate software or sometimes embedded in malicious websites through browser exploits. Once installed on your system, they quietly record everything you type and often periodically send that log file back to the attacker over the internet.
Terrifying. You wouldn't even know. Then, the very broad term malware. This seems to encompass a huge range of threats, almost like a catch-all term for any kind of malicious software.
It really is an umbrella term, yeah. Malware is used to describe any software or firmware intentionally designed to perform an unauthorized process that will have an adverse impact on the confidentiality, integrity, or availability, that CIA triad again, of an information system. Common examples, as we've touched on, include viruses, worms, which are self-propagating, Trojan horses, which disguise malware as something useful, adware, unwanted ads, spyware, spies on your activity, ransomware, and really any other code-based program designed to infect and harm a host system. If it's malicious software, it generally falls under the malware umbrella.
Gotcha. And finally, for host-based attacks, the source mentions rogue mobile apps. This really speaks to the trust we often implicitly place in the apps we download onto our smartphones and tablets every day.
Absolutely. This is a significant threat in the mobile world. Rogue mobile apps involve a malicious application that is designed to look and maybe even function like a legitimate app. A fraudulent party creates this app, perhaps mimicking a popular game, a utility, or even a banking app, and distributes it, often through unofficial app stores, phishing links, or sometimes even sneaking it into official stores before being caught.
And the victim just installs it.
Yeah, a victim unknowingly installs it, thinking it's harmless or useful. Once installed, however, the rogue app can perform malicious actions in the background. Steal personal information like contacts or photos, grant the attacker unauthorized remote access to the device, display intrusive ads, subscribe the user to premium services without consent, or execute other malicious acts, all while appearing perfectly normal and functional to the user on the surface.
Always be careful what you install and where you get it from.
Definitely. Stick to official app stores and check permissions carefully.
Okay, we've covered a lot of technical attacks, but sometimes the weakest link in the security chain isn't the code or the network. It's the human element, right? This brings us to social engineering attacks, which exploit psychology and trust rather than technical vulnerabilities.
This is a fascinating and, frankly, extremely effective category of attack because it leverages basic human psychology and our natural tendencies. Social engineering involves using psychological manipulation or deception to trick people, often employees, but also individuals, into divulging sensitive information, providing unauthorized access to systems or premises, or maybe assisting an attacker in committing fraud. They cleverly bypass technical defenses by targeting human trust, helpfulness, or fear.
So it's about building confidence and trust, often through digital means like email or social media, to then exploit that relationship for malicious purposes.
Precisely. Human interaction, typically via email, text messages, direct messaging apps, social media platforms, or even just a phone call, is the primary medium through which perpetrators gain that necessary confidence and trust to exploit their victims. They play on emotions, creating a sense of urgency, appealing to authority, invoking fear, sparking curiosity, or simply exploiting someone's desire to be helpful.
Let's start with the most common one, a term almost everyone has probably heard by now, phishing. The classic email scam.
Yep, the classic. Phishing is a digital social engineering tactic that uses authentic-looking but ultimately bogus emails or sometimes texts or messages. These communications typically request information directly from users asking for login credentials, credit card numbers, social security numbers, or they direct users to fake websites that are designed to look legitimate, which then prompt them to enter those sensitive details. It's essentially mass-scale digital baiting, casting a wide net and hoping someone takes the hook.
And then there's spear phishing, which sounds much more targeted and therefore probably more effective and maybe more dangerous.
It absolutely is on both counts. Spear phishing specifically targets particular individuals or specific employees, often within a single corporate entity. The attacker usually does some reconnaissance first to make the lure more believable. They might pose as a legitimate internal department, like human resources sending out a policy update, or IT support requesting credentials for a system check. Sometimes they even impersonate a high-ranking employee, like the CEO or the IT director.
So more personalized.
Much more personalized. The goal is to obtain highly confidential information, usernames, passwords, financial data, personal employee data, which can then be used for more sophisticated exploitation or direct financial theft. The emails are often meticulously crafted using the victim's name, referencing real colleagues or projects, or using internal company jargon to appear highly convincing, much harder to spot than generic phishing.
This sounds a lot like business email compromise, BEC, which the source also calls whaling. Are these terms basically interchangeable with spear phishing, or are they distinct?
They are very closely related and often overlap significantly, but there are nuances. BEC is generally considered a type of spear phishing that specifically targets executives and other high-ranking individuals within an organization, the big fish, hence the term whaling.
Targeting the whales.
Exactly. These schemes typically involve trying to convince the executive, or perhaps someone in finance who reports to them, to take a specific action, most commonly transferring large sums of money via wire transfer to a fraudulent account, maybe disguised as paying a fake foreign supplier invoice, or perhaps sending highly sensitive corporate data like employee W-2 forms to someone impersonating an attorney, an auditor, or another trusted external party. The stakes in whaling the peck are usually very high due to the target's authority.
Got it. So BC whaling and spearfishing are both about targeting specific people, often with impersonation. How does pretexting fit into this? The name sounds like it's all about creating a fake story or scenario.
Pretexting is another social engineering technique, similar in goal to BAC and spearfishing, but it really focuses on the creation of that fabricated scenario, the pretext, which the attacker uses to engage the target. The attacker invents a believable story or adopts a fake identity to establish legitimacy and often instill a strong sense of urgency or obligation in the employee they're targeting.
Like, I need this information right now for an urgent reason.
Exactly. By using this false reason, the attacker aims to obtain sensitive information. I'm from IT and we have a critical system outage. I need your password to fix your account now is a classic pretext. Or manipulate the victim into performing some other fraudulent act, often under the false pretense that they are helping solve a problem or complying with a necessary procedure. It's all about the convincing setup story.
What about catfishing? This is a term often associated more with personal relationships and online dating scams, right?
It is, yes. Catfishing typically involves the creation of a completely fake online persona, often with stolen photos and fabricated life details, that is used to lure a victim into a seemingly genuine personal or romantic relationship with a fraudster online.
Building emotional connection.
Exactly. Once that emotional connection and trust are established over time, the person conducting the scheme starts appealing to the victim's emotions, inventing sob stories or urgent needs, and eventually requests money, gifts, gift cards, or other items of value. It's a long-con social engineering attack built entirely on emotional manipulation and a significant, often heartbreaking, breach of trust.
Very manipulative. Then there's farming. This sounds like it might be related to phishing, but maybe more technical. The source says it often redirects you without you even noticing.
It's often used in combination with phishing, but it involves a more technical manipulation behind the scenes. Farming involves a victim entering personal information into a website or portal that perfectly imitates a legitimate one, but is actually fraudulent. Now, the link to this fraudulent site might be embedded in a phishing email. That's one way.
Okay.
But even more subtly, farming can involve the manipulation of domain name system, DNS servers, or the host's file on a victim's computer. In this case, even if the victim types the correct, legitimate URL for their bank directly into their browser's address bar, the corrupted DNS lookup silently redirects them to the attacker's fake site instead of the real one. This makes it incredibly hard to detect because the URL in their browser address bar looks completely correct and legitimate.
Wow, that's insidious. You think you're safe because you tapped the address yourself.
Exactly. Much harder to spot than just a dodgy link.
And finally, in this category, phishing. This one is telephonic, so it's basically phishing, but over the phone, exploiting our trust in voices and caller ID.
Exactly. Voice phishing involves fraudulent schemes that use the telephone system, often using voice over internet protocol, VoIP, to make calls cheaply and easily spoof caller IDs.
Spoofing the caller ID.
Yeah. These schemes normally involve a spoofed or fraudulent caller ID that appears to be from a legitimate business, like your bank, a tech support company, like Microsoft or Apple, a government agency like the IRS or Social Security, or maybe even a local number. The attackers might use live callers reading scripts or increasingly interactive recorded messages, IVR systems, that prompt the victim to enter account numbers, passwords, or other sensitive information using their phone's keypad tones or even voice recognition. It's an auditory social engineering attack, relying on creating urgency or authority through a voice or a seemingly official automated system.
Like those fake Amazon or IRS calls people get.
Precisely those. Classic phishing.
So, social engineering really boils down to exploiting human trust and our natural inclinations to help, comply, or react to urgency, making humans often the primary vulnerability, regardless of the tech defenses. But not all attacks are purely digital or psychological. Some involve real-world interaction, direct physical presence. Let's discuss physical on-premises attacks, the real-world invasion.
Right. This is an important category often overlooked in purely digital discussions. These are security breaches carried out on an organization's actual physical premises or performed in some way that directly involves a bad actor gaining physical control over sensitive data, hardware, or software. It's a potent reminder that not all cyber threats originate online. Sometimes the attacker literally walks in the door.
This starts with something as seemingly mundane, almost low-tech, as intercepting discarded equipment. Sounds like dumpster diving, but for sensitive data.
That's exactly what it can be. By obtaining access to outdated or discarded electronic equipment, perhaps directly from the trash, or maybe through third-party companies that handle electronic waste recycling or resale fraudsters, can potentially steal sensitive data that was not properly and securely wiped from those devices before disposal.
Things like hard drives.
Old hard drives, USB sticks, discarded servers, even old company phones or printers with internal storage can contain a treasure trove of confidential information if they haven't been securely erased or physically destroyed. It's a critical reminder that data persists even on old hardware, and proper, secure disposal procedures are absolutely key. Just hitting delete isn't enough.
Good point. Then there's piggybacking or tailgating. This sounds like literally sneaking in behind someone authorized.
It is exactly that. Piggybacking involves an attacker using an authorized person's legitimate access to gain unauthorized entrance to a restricted physical location, or sometimes even electronic access. They might simply follow closely behind someone as they swipe their access card and walk through a secured door, relying on the authorized person being polite and holding the door, or just being unobservant.
Exploiting politeness or inattention.
Right, or they might try to blend in with the crowd or present a fake badge, which someone will just wave them through. It exploits basic human courtesy, trust, or simple lack of attention to security protocols.
The source also notes that on-premises infrastructures are often targeted by attackers. Why is that? You'd intuitively think physical buildings with locks and guards would be more secure than the amorphous internet.
That's interesting, isn't it? Hacking groups or attackers often target on-premises infrastructures specifically because they know that many organizations, especially smaller or medium-sized businesses, might lack the sophisticated, layered cybersecurity defenses compared to what a major cloud provider whose entire business is secure infrastructure might offer.
So maybe weaker defenses.
Potentially, yeah. This lack of robust protection on-site may be due to the high cost of implementing and maintaining advanced security solutions, or sometimes simply a lack of awareness or prioritization of potential physical and cyber threats converging. Attackers often look for the path of least resistance, and sometimes that path is through a poorly secured server room door or an unmonitored network port in an empty conference room.
Makes sense. What about tampering? This implies direct physical manipulation of the IT system itself once inside.
Yes. Tampering involves an attacker gaining physical access to a company's IT infrastructure servers, network closets, cabling, and then directly modifying how its network collects, stores, processes, or transmits data.
What kind of modifications?
This could be done by physically rewiring network cabling to intercept or divert traffic. Plugging malicious devices directly into network equipment, like switches or routers, to monitor traffic or install malware. Or maybe adding completely unauthorized devices, like a rogue wireless access point hidden under a desk, or a small malicious USB device plugged into the back of a server. It's a very direct form of physical compromise that can be incredibly hard to detect remotely if you don't have good physical security monitoring.
If you can touch it, you can own it, essentially.
That's the old security adage, yes.
And the most straightforward of all physical attacks, theft. This isn't a digital attack itself, but it certainly has massive digital consequences.
Absolutely. Theft, in this context, simply refers to the act of physically stealing assets that contain data, or the hardware or software itself. This could be stealing a laptop left unattended that contains sensitive files, removing a hard drive directly from a server rack, pocketing a USB drive with confidential plans, or even just stealing physical documents containing sensitive information like printouts of customer lists. If that stolen hardware contains unencrypted sensitive data, the physical theft immediately becomes a major data breach, with all the associated digital consequences, fines, and reputational damage.
Right. Loss of the device is loss of the data. Okay, we've explored attacks directly against networks, applications, hosts, people via social engineering, and even physical spaces. Now let's look at something that often connects many of these areas: supply chain attacks. This sounds like compromising the whole connected ecosystem, maybe hitting a weaker link in the chain to ultimately get to a stronger primary target.
This is an increasingly critical and challenging area in cybersecurity today. Supply chain attacks use various cyber tactics, but they specifically target the interconnected production, distribution, and delivery of goods and services, both physical and digital, within a supply chain.
What's the goal?
The ultimate goal is often to cause larger disruptions in the normal operations of a target company, government agency, or other entity. frequently by compromising a more vulnerable, less secure link within their supply chain, rather than attempting to breach the main target's potentially stronger defenses directly. It's indirect compromise.
So it's not attacking the main target head-on, but rather going after one of its trusted vendors, software providers, or partners first, like poisoning the well that everyone downstream drinks from.
That's a perfect analogy, poisoning a well. One common method described is embedded software code. This involves attackers managing to insert malicious code into legitimate prepackaged software or firmware that is then sold or distributed to a target company by a trusted vendor.
Like compromising an update.
Exactly. Compromising a software update is a classic example. The target company then unknowingly installs this compromised software or firmware update, believing it to be legitimate and safe from their trusted supplier. The embedded malicious code can then execute, perhaps opening a backdoor, stealing data, or deploying further malware.
We also hear about foreign-sourced attacks in this context, especially regarding hardware, software manufactured overseas.
Yes.
Is that a specific supply chain risk?
Yes, the source highlights this. In many countries, governments exert deep, sometimes opaque control over companies operating within their private sector. There's a documented risk that those governments may compel or cooperate with local companies to use products sold to other countries, hardware components, software, networking gear to conduct surveillance or deliver malicious code. They essentially weaponize commercial goods or services that are then integrated, often unknowingly, into another country's critical infrastructure or sensitive business systems.
A geopolitical dimension to supply chain risk.
Definitely. Another related method is pre-installed malware on hardware. This is a terrifying thought that your brand new device could come compromised right out of the box. It is. This involves attackers managing to install malware onto devices before they're even delivered to the end user or company in the supply chain. Think malware preloaded onto USB drives given away at a conference, or hidden in cheap cameras, phones, or other hardware sourced from untrusted manufacturers. Once the company acquiring these devices connects them to its network, the hidden malware executes, potentially compromising the entire system. It exploits the inherent trust we place in new, shrink-wrapped equipment.
Wow. And then there are direct vendor attacks, where the supplier itself is the primary target, but the goal is really to get at their customers downstream.
Right. This is where an attack is specifically perpetrated upon key vendors or suppliers of a primary target company. The aim here might be to disrupt the normal production of goods or delivery of services provided by that vendor, thereby disrupting the business operations of the ultimate target who relies on them. Or it could be to steal the vendor's customer list, or perhaps gain access to the vendor's systems as a stepping stone to then attack their clients' networks. If your essential software provider or managed service provider gets breached, suddenly all their customers are at risk.
A major ripple effect potential there. Finally, what are watering hole attacks in the supply chain context? This sounds like a strategic ambush, lying in wait somewhere victims are likely to go.
That's a good way to think of it. In this method, fraudsters first identify websites that are commonly used and trusted by employees within their target company, or perhaps across an entire industry. These could be websites of specific suppliers, industry news portals, customer support forums, or even regulatory entities that people need to visit regularly.
The watering hole where the targets gather.
Exactly. The attackers then find and exploit vulnerabilities on that trusted third-party website, the watering hole. They might inject malicious code into the site or set up drive-by downloads. Then, when employees from the target organization visit the compromised but trusted site, their computers get infected with malware, or their credentials get stolen, or they are redirected to malicious content. It's like poisoning a shared water source that multiple organizations rely on, making it a highly efficient way for attackers to distribute malware or gain initial access to many different targets at once by compromising just one popular site.
Very strategic. It's abundantly clear from all these examples that these attacks can have a devastating ripple effect, far, far beyond just the initial organization targeted.
Yeah.
It truly underscores the deep interconnectedness of our modern digital world, where a single weakness in one place can rapidly expose and impact many others.
Absolutely. That's perhaps one of the most critical takeaways. Given the deep, often complex and invisible interconnections of organizations with their customers, the vendors, their partners, and even their regulators, a cyber attack on just one entity can have a profound cascading impact on many others throughout that ecosystem. The chain reaction can be severe, demonstrating clearly that no organization is truly an island in the digital ocean anymore. Your security depends partly on the security of everyone you connect with.
Let's use some specific examples from our sources to really illustrate this ripple effect concretely. Take a ransomware attack that successfully hits a manufacturing company, for instance. How does that typically spiderweb out and affect others?
Okay, good example. If a manufacturing company's core servers and databases are encrypted by ransomware, preventing them from accessing customer order data, managing production schedules, or processing shipments, obviously the attacked company itself suffers immediate and critical loss of access to their systems, grinding their entire operation to a halt. They can't make things, they can't ship
Total
things,
shutdown.
total shutdown potentially. Then their customers are unable to receive the products they ordered or even place new orders. This leads to major interruptions in fulfillments, broken delivery promises, and severely damaged trust in relationships.
Customers go elsewhere.
They might have to. Their vendors, the companies that supply raw materials or components to the manufacturer, might be unable to communicate with the attacked company via their usual electronic data interchange, EDI channels, to fulfill purchase orders or get paid. This leads to disruptions in the vendor's own supply chains and cash flow.
The chain breaks upstream, too.
Exactly. And even partner organizations, maybe distributors or financial partners, might experience direct financial losses if, say, they feel obligated to help pay the ransom to get the victim back online quickly, or if their own operations are severely disrupted simply by the inability of their key manufacturing partner to function. It creates this spreading domino effect of financial and operational strain across the board.
A huge mess from one incident. Okay, what about a different type, say a mobile code virus attack? Let's imagine a company gets infected with a particularly nasty, fast-spreading computer virus that starts deleting data and propagating through its network. What are the ripple effects there?
Okay. If the company gets infected with a virus that, say, deletes critical customer contact data from their CRM system and also spreads rapidly through their internal business network and potentially outbound email, the attacked company, naturally, experiences significant data loss and major operational disruption. They might lose years of valuable customer contacts or critical production schedules, which could take ages to reconstruct, if ever.
Painful.
Very painful. Their customers might have their own ordering systems or computers infected if the virus spreads through shared online portals, email attachments from infected employees, or other shared communication channels. This could cause data loss or operational issues for the customers.
Spreading the infection.
Right. Similarly, vendors could find their systems infected through those same shared network drives, email communications, or integrated systems, potentially leading to the loss of critical production data or designs on their end of the relationship.
The virus jumps the fence.
It can, yeah. And again, partner organizations may have to reallocate significant internal resources, IT staff time, operational support, just to help the attacked company recover, causing disruptions in their own main business operations. Plus, they're potentially exposed to the same threat if the virus spreads to them through the partnership connections.
It really highlights how trust and digital connections can be exploited. Okay, one more ripple effect example. A malware attack that doesn't necessarily disrupt operations, but successfully steals and exposes confidential customer and maybe vendor data. What's the fallout from that?
Right, a pure data exfiltration breach. If an attacker infects a company's servers with malware, maybe spyware or a data scraper, and successfully copies and steals confidential customer data like names, addresses, credit card numbers, maybe passwords, the attacked company immediately faces severe reputational damage once the breach becomes public. They're likely looking at potential regulatory fines under laws like GDPR or HIPR, and almost certainly, they'll face potentially massive, costly class action lawsuits from the affected customers whose data was compromised.
Huge legal and PR nightmare.
Absolutely. The customers themselves are the direct victims here, too. Their confidential data is exposed to the attacker and likely sold on the dark web, leading to risks of identity theft, financial fraud, account takeovers, or other harms for those individuals whose information was stolen.
Real harm to real people.
Yes. And importantly, vendor information might also be caught up in the breach. Maybe the company stored vendor bank account details for payments or sensitive contract terms. If that vendor data is exposed to the attacker, it could lead to financial fraud against the vendors, impacting their liquidity and certainly damaging their trust in the partnership going forward.
They got exposed to their customer.
Exactly. And finally, for the broader organizational impact, beyond just the immediate company, it's about that pervasive loss of trust across the entire ecosystem. Customers, vendors, partners, they may all reconsider their relationships with the breached entity, leading to long-term business decline. It erodes the fundamental trust needed for business.
It's crystal clear that the how of cyber attacks is incredibly diverse and deeply interconnected, creating this really complex web of vulnerabilities vulnerabilities and potential consequences. Now let's shift gears slightly and look at the typical stages these attacks go through. It sounds like there's often a method to the madness, almost like a criminal mastermind step-by-step plan. Let's talk about the cyber attack lifecycle.
That's a great way to think about it. And what's important to understand is that while the specific tools and techniques vary wildly depending on the attacker and the target, most cyber attacks, regardless of their ultimate goal or level of sophistication, tend to share a common set of logical steps or phases. Recognizing these stages is really helpful for defenders because it helps in understanding how defenses need to be layered and where you might have opportunities to detect and break the attack chain before completion.
Okay, let's walk through them. The very first stage is typically reconnaissance. This sounds like the attacker gathering intelligence, like a spy casing a building before trying to get inside.
Precisely. It's the information gathering phase. In this initial stage, attackers try to discover and collect as much information as possible about their target. The organization, its IT systems, its people, its operations.
What kind of information?
It can be anything, really. Some is publicly available. The location of their facilities, employee names, and roles may be found on LinkedIn or the company website, news articles about their technology stack. Then there's more technical reconnaissance. Trying to figure out the type of network and infrastructure they deploy, what security measures they appear to have externally, like what firewall vendor they might use, maybe even mapping out the management hierarchy to identify potential targets for spear phishing later.
Looking for weaknesses.
Exactly. During this phase, attackers are also actively probing for specific technical vulnerabilities from the outside. They might be running port scans, like we discussed, looking for unprotected open ports. They might be checking for known software applications exposed to the internet that haven't been properly patched against known exploits. It's all about finding the weakest point of entry, the path of least resistance into the target environment.
So they're thoroughly casing the digital joint, essentially mapping out the entire external attack surface. The next stage, then, must be gaining access, actually getting inside.
Right. This is where all that information collected during reconnaissance is put to active use. In this step, attackers leverage one or more of the attack techniques we've discussed. Maybe exploiting a network vulnerability they found, launching a successful phishing attack against an employee, deploying malware, or exploiting a weakness in a web application to gain that initial unauthorized foothold inside the target system or network. This is the crucial moment of initial penetration, the breach of the outer defenses.
Once they're in, though, they probably don't have full control yet. So the third stage is escalation of privileges. It's about moving from just a basic toehold to getting more power and deeper access.
That's exactly right. Initial access often lands an attacker in a low privilege account or system. So once that initial unauthorized access is obtained, attackers almost immediately attempt to gain higher levels of access within the compromised system or network. If they initially got in as, say, a standard user with very limited permissions, their next goal is to become an administrator or gain access to highly sensitive databases or take control of critical infrastructure components.
How do they do that?
This is often achieved by exploiting additional vulnerabilities within the network that they couldn't see from the outside, or perhaps by finding and cracking stored passwords, or maybe using tools to capture the credentials of a user who does have higher privileges. The goal is to elevate their status, allowing them much deeper access to the system's core functions and data.
And then once they have the access they need, they want to make sure they can stay there, right? That brings us to maintaining access, ensuring persistence so they don't get kicked out easily.
Exactly. Why go to all that trouble just to get booted out after 5 minutes? In this stage, the attacker's objective is to remain undetected within the compromised system for a sustained period of time, often for weeks or months, until their ultimate objective for the attack is completed.
Hiding in the shadows.
Right. They'll also actively look for alternative ways to prolong their access or ensure they can return later, even if their initial entry point is discovered and closed down by defenders. This often involves installing persistent backdoors, like those reverse shells, creating new user accounts for themselves, planting rootkits, malware designed to hide their presence from the operating system, or maybe modifying system settings to ensure their malicious processes restart automatically. They want to ensure they can come and go as they please, undetected.
Okay, so they're in, they've got the access they need, and they've set up shop to stay. Now they move to their primary objective: network exploitation and exfiltration. This is where the real damage happens, the reason they broke in the first place.
This is the core malicious activity, yes, the culmination of all their preparatory work. At this stage, attackers finally proceed with whatever their primary objective was. This could be disrupting system operations, like deploying ransomware. It could be stealing sensitive data, intellectual property, customer databases, financial records. It might involve modifying data to cause financial or reputational harm, perhaps disabling access to systems or data for legitimate users, or performing other malicious activities. If their goal is data theft, this is the stage where the data is actively exfiltrated, meaning it's copied out of the target network and sent back to the attacker's own servers or storage. This is the action on objectives phase.
And the final stage in this life cycle, which often happens concurrently with the exploitation or right after it's completed, is covering tracks. It's all about erasing the evidence, cleaning up the crime scene to avoid getting caught.
This is crucial for sophisticated attackers, especially APTs, who want to avoid detection, attribution, and subsequent countermeasures or prosecution. This step occurs either while the main attack is still in progress or immediately after it's completed. It involves the attacker actively trying to conceal their presence and erase any trace of the entry or exit points through which access was breached. They want to leave no digital fingerprints behind.
How exactly do they manage to cover their tracks in a complex digital environment? Logs seem like they'd catch them.
Well, they try to defeat the logs. They employ several common methods. They might have privileges to disable audit functionality altogether, preventing logs from recording their specific malicious activities in the first place. They might selectively clear or delete specific incriminating entries from system logs, security logs, or application logs. Sometimes they even try to modify logs and system registry files to obscure their presence or cleverly make it seem like a legitimate user performed the malicious actions. And of course, they'll try to thoroughly remove all the malicious files, tools, scripts, and/or temporary folders they created or used during the attack. The ultimate goal is to make it look like nothing ever happened, or, failing that, to make it extremely difficult to figure out exactly what happened, who did it, and how they got in.
It's a really sophisticated, methodical, step-by-step process, illustrating that many of these attacks aren't just random acts of digital vandalism, but often well-planned, patient campaigns. But as we know, technology never stands still. As it evolves, so do the battlegrounds for these cyber threats.
Let's spend some time talking about some emerging, or at least rapidly expanding, areas that are increasingly central to our digital lives. Cloud computing, mobile technologies, and the burgeoning Internet of Things, IoT.
Yes, these are absolutely critical areas to discuss because they represent both the present and the future of computing and connectivity. And each one introduces its own unique set of cybersecurity risks and challenges, often in ways that differ significantly from traditional on-premises environments. As we increasingly embrace these technologies for convenience, scalability, and efficiency, we absolutely must understand their inherent vulnerabilities as well. Let's start with cloud computing. It's everywhere now. For anyone who might still be a bit fuzzy on it, what exactly is cloud computing and why has it become so ubiquitous in recent years?
Sure. At its core, cloud computing is a model for enabling convenient on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources, things like networks, servers, storage, applications, and services. Basically, it allows organizations and individuals to store, use, process, and share data, software, and applications via the internet without the need to physically own or manage the underlying physical infrastructure required for those functions.
So, renting computing power instead of buying it.
That's a good way to think of it. Instead of buying and maintaining their own servers and their own data centers, companies access the needed computing power, storage, and software through third-party cloud service providers like Amazon Web Services, AWS, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, GCP. It's become ubiquitous because it offers incredible benefits. Scalability, you can easily scale resources up or down as needed, flexibility, access from anywhere, and often significant cost savings compared to building and managing your own infrastructure.
Okay, but that means you're relying heavily on a third party to manage your sensitive data and critical software. That sounds inherently risky from a security perspective, doesn't it? Handing over the keys.
It does sound risky, and you're right, there is indeed an element of risk because your sensitive information and user applications are being stored and managed by someone else outside your direct physical control. However, what's fascinating, and perhaps counterintuitive to some, is the perceived security paradox here. Most major cloud providers are actually generally considered more secure than the average individual company trying to manage its own IT infrastructure on premises,
Yeah.
especially for small to medium-sized businesses.
Really? Why is that the case? That seems to go against the gut feeling for some people who feel safer keeping their data physically on site.
It's understandable, but there are good reasons. Major cloud providers have security as a core competency. They're often required by regulations and customer demands to maintain exceptionally high levels of security protocols, procedures, and physical security for their data centers. They invest billions of dollars in state-of-the-art defenses, employ armies of top security experts, regularly upgrade their systems with the latest security patches, and implement robust internal controls to comply with stringent regulations like GDPR, APAA, PCI DSS, etc.
And they get audited?
Constantly. They commonly undergo rigorous independent audits like SOC2 engagements, which specifically assess their security controls over customer data, providing a high degree of verified assurance. They are specialists in security and infrastructure management with resources and expertise far beyond what most individual businesses could possibly muster on their own.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. They're literally in the business of providing secure infrastructure. But despite that high level of security, the source points out there are still specific risks related to using cloud computing that organizations absolutely need to be aware of and manage. What are some of those unique challenges?
Right, no system is perfect. One interesting risk mentioned is additional industry exposure. By design, public cloud environments are multi-tenant, meaning multiple organizations share the same underlying infrastructure. So, organizations subscribing to a cloud provider might, in theory, be exposed to the unique industry risks or attack campaigns targeting other subscribers on that same shared cloud platform. For example, if a cloud provider hosts a company in the financial sector that becomes a target of a sophisticated financial malware campaign, other companies on that same infrastructure, even if they're not in finance, could potentially become collateral damage or face related threats they might not otherwise encounter.
Hmm. Noisy neighbors, digitally speaking. What about actual attacks targeting the cloud environment itself? Can malware get into the cloud infrastructure?
Absolutely. That's where cloud malware injection attacks come in. This is an attack specific to cloud computing-based systems, where an attacker finds a way to gain access to the cloud provider's environment, maybe through a vulnerability in the management interface or compromised credentials, and then injects their malicious code or virtual machine instances into that environment. That malware can then be used to steal data belonging to other tenants, disrupt services for other users on the platform, consume resources fraudulently, or maybe gain further privileged access within the cloud infrastructure itself, potentially impacting multiple clients of that provider.
And compliance violations can still be a risk, even with major cloud providers. It sounds like they should be experts at meeting regulations.
They generally are, but the risk isn't zero. There's always a risk that a specific third-party host might not have security protocols in place that meet your specific organization's unique privacy and confidentiality requirements, especially if you operate in a highly regulated niche industry. Or maybe their standard controls aren't quite up to the standard mandated by your specific contractual obligations or internal policies.
Yeah.
It really requires careful due diligence during vendor selection and very clear contractual agreements defining responsibilities and ensuring alignment on compliance needs. You can't just assume they cover everything you need.
Shared responsibility model, right?
Exactly. The cloud provider secures the cloud infrastructure, but you're responsible for securing what you put in the cloud and ensuring their services meet your needs.
Okay. What about that feeling of losing control when your data and applications aren't physically on your own servers anymore? That loss of direct physical or logical access, is that a tangible risk?
It is a valid concern for many organizations, often summarized as loss of control. Not having that direct physical or deep logical access to the underlying computing equipment means an organization inevitably relinquishes some degree of control over its infrastructure management. As a result, changes or upgrades to cybersecurity measures implemented by the provider might not be as timely as the subscribing company would prefer in an emergency. Or perhaps the provider's standard security configurations might not fully meet the company's specific granular standards or urgent needs. You're essentially trusting them with the operational keys, and you have less direct say in how things are run minute to minute.
Is loss of data still a significant risk in the cloud, even with all their sophisticated backups and redundancies? Seems less likely than losing data from your own server failure.
It is generally less likely for catastrophic loss due to hardware failure, yes, because providers have massive redundancy. However, cloud computing service providers are still potentially susceptible to data breaches, theft by attackers, accidental data loss, maybe through misconfiguration by the provider or the customer, or temporary data exposure. No system is 100% impervious, and these large, centralized data centers are obviously very attractive, high-value targets for sophisticated attackers. A major security breach or even just a significant outage at a major cloud provider can potentially affect millions of users simultaneously.
Right, the blast radius is huge if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And along with that loss of control, the source mentions loss of visibility. You can't necessarily see everything happening under the hood on the provider's side.
That's also true. The subscribing organization often lacks full, deep visibility into its IT infrastructure risks because only the cloud provider typically has that complete granular view of the underlying physical hardware, the network fabric, and the hypervisor layer. This means the subscribing organization might not know all the potential risks it's exposed to at the infrastructure level, relying heavily on the provider's transparency, reporting, and auditing results. You lose some situational awareness.
Many companies now use multiple cloud providers, or a mix of different cloud services and their own on-premises systems, a hybrid approach.
Yeah.
Are there specific risks associated with managing that kind of complex environment beyond just the obvious complexity itself?
Absolutely. That's covered under multi-cloud and hybrid management issues. While strategically using a hybrid or multi-cloud setup can actually be a good cybersecurity diversification strategy, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Spreading the risk.
Right. It can also be incredibly challenging from a management and security perspective. Integrating, monitoring, and consistently securing multiple disparate cloud environments alongside potentially legacy on-premises infrastructure is complex. This complexity can make detecting a sophisticated cyber attack much more difficult, because the attack might span across different siloed systems with different logging formats and security tools, potentially breaking the chain of visibility needed to piece the attack together. It increases the management overhead significantly.
Lots of moving parts to track. Finally, for cloud risks, what about the theft or loss of intellectual property, IP? If your company's most valuable secrets, your crown jewels, are stored or processed in cloud applications, that has to be a major concern.
It's a huge concern, especially for R&D intensive companies or those with unique algorithms or proprietary data. Cloud applications inevitably store various types of sensitive data for companies, potentially including highly valuable intellectual property, trade secrets, sensitive research data, or strategic plans. There's always the inherent risk that the cloud service provider might lack sufficient internal controls over this highly sensitive data, or perhaps that one of their privileged employees could become an insider threat and steal or leak it. This is why careful vetting of cloud providers' security practices, data handling policies, employee background checks, and contractual guarantees regarding IP protection is absolutely essential before migrating critical IP to the cloud.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift focus now to mobile technologies. Smartphones, tablets, wearables, they're absolutely everywhere now, integral to both our corporate and personal lives, boosting productivity. But that convenience and mobility comes with its own unique set of risks, doesn't it?
They are indeed ubiquitous, and they've transformed how we work, allowing us to be productive from almost anywhere. However, their very mobility, their constant connection to potentially untrusted public networks, and often a lack of centralized IT oversight compared to traditional desktops introduce specific and significant cybersecurity risks that absolutely must be addressed, both by individuals using their own devices and by organizations deploying them to employees.
How are mobile devices similar to traditional computers in terms of the risks they face, and how are they uniquely different or perhaps more vulnerable?
Well, in terms of functionality and the type of sensitive information they access, most modern mobile devices are essentially powerful pocket-sized computers. They store corporate email, confidential documents, access sensitive business applications, financial accounts,
Your whole life is on there.
pretty much. So they face many similar security threats like malware, phishing attacks, targeting mobile users, data leakage, etc. However, there are key differences. Their operating systems, like iOS and Android, are different from Windows or macOS, requiring separate, specific security patches and updates which users might delay installing. More importantly, unlike relatively immobile desktop computers usually sitting behind a corporate firewall, mobile devices are constantly carried around and exposed to public, often completely unsecured networks like coffee shop Wi-Fi, airport hotspots, hotel networks. This dramatically increases their vulnerability to network-based attacks like man in the middle.
So if companies allow employees to use mobile devices for work, they really need to install protective software or have very strong usage policies in place. You can't just let them run wild.
Absolutely not. Companies must either install Protective Mobile Device Management, MDM, or Enterprise Mobility Management, EMM software on every mobile device that accesses corporate data. This software allows IT to enforce security policies, monitor for threats, encrypt data, and even remotely wipe the device if it's lost or stolen. Or if MDM software isn't used, maybe for personal devices in a BYOD scenario, then very strict usage policies must be clearly communicated and enforced, like forbidding connection to public Wi-Fi for accessing sensitive corporate resources, mandating strong passcodes and encryption, and minimizing the amount of sensitive data stored locally. The human element, user awareness, and compliance becomes incredibly critical here.
What are some of the specific cybersecurity threats that are particularly relevant or unique to mobile devices that listeners should really be aware of?
Okay, several key ones. There's application malware, like those rogue apps we mentioned earlier. A user downloads an app that appears legitimate, maybe from an alternative app store or a web link, but it quietly contains malware that grants unauthorized access to the device. It could steal private information like contacts, messages, photos, GPS location, banking credentials, log keystrokes, or even secretly record audio or video, all without the user's knowledge.
Scary stuff.
Also, a huge and very common risk is simply lack of updates. Mobile operating systems and apps release security patches frequently, but users often delay or ignore installing them. Mobile devices that go long periods without installing these critical patches and security fixes remain vulnerable to known exploits that attackers are actively scanning for. It's like leaving your front door unlocked in a bad neighborhood just because you couldn't be bothered to turn the key.
And encryption. You mentioned passcodes. Many people just rely on a simple 4-digit PIN or maybe face unlock. Is that enough?
Often it's not enough, especially if the underlying data isn't encrypted. That's a critical point. Many mobile devices might not have full disk encryption enabled by default, or users might disable it. They might rely only on a simple passcode, PIN, or biometric lock for access. Once an attacker gains physical access to an unlocked device or bypasses the lock screen, which is sometimes possible, they may find the data itself is unencrypted. Worse, passwords for critical online accounts can often be easily reset via links sent to the email account accessible on the device itself, potentially exposing a wide range of personal information and corporate data. This risk is directly tied to physical threats,
Physical threats like?
like the simple loss or theft of the device itself. If a device containing sensitive corporate data is lost or stolen and it lacks sufficient access controls, strong passcode, encryption, remote wipe capability, then unauthorized users could potentially access highly sensitive information, corporate applications, email, and more. It becomes a physical data breach.
That public Wi-Fi risk seems huge too, given how often people connect automatically at coffee shops or airports.
Definitely. Connecting to unsecured Wi-Fi networks is a major threat for mobile users. When you connect your mobile device to a public, unsecured network, one that doesn't require a password or uses a shared password, you have no idea who else is on that same network. Anyone else connected could potentially try to access your device directly, intercept your unencrypted internet traffic using those man-in-the-middle attacks we talked about, redirect you to malicious websites, or infect your device with malware, simply because the network itself offers zero protection or segmentation between users. It's a hostile environment.
And what about privacy concerns like location tracking? How can that be weaponized by an attacker?
Unauthorized location tracking is a significant privacy and potential security risk. While GPS is useful, if a threat actor gains access to your device's location data, maybe through malware, a leaky app, or exploiting a platform vulnerability, they can track your movements precisely. With this knowledge of your physical location, attackers could potentially devise plans that exploit that information. It could be for physical harm, like planning a robbery when they know you're away from home. Or it could be digital, like timing a highly convincing spear phishing call pretending to be your local bank branch when they know you're actually near that branch. It adds a creepy layer of context to their attacks.
Are there other mobile-related attack vectors we should think about, maybe beyond the smartphone or tablet itself? Things that can compromise them from the outside, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. Don't forget about mobile storage devices. Things like USB thumb drives, external hard drives, SD memory cards, even older optical discs like CDs or DVDs. These can be easily loaded with malware and used to quickly infect other devices when plugged in. For instance, that classic trick of leaving a compromised USB drive lying around in a company parking lot or restroom. An unsuspecting employee picks it up out of curiosity, plugs it into their laptop just to see what's on it, and boom, the malware installs onto their machine, potentially compromising the entire corporate network.
The Trojan horse USB stick.
Exactly. And also, don't underestimate surveillance capabilities targeting mobile communications themselves. Mobile devices can be monitored or surveilled for eavesdropping purposes using specialized equipment. Things like cell site simulators, often called stingrays or MSI catchers, can mimic legitimate cell towers and trick phones nearby into connecting to them. Bluetooth scanners can intercept insecure Bluetooth communications. These tools can potentially be used by sophisticated threat actors or state-sponsored groups to intercept your calls, text messages, or data traffic within a specific physical radius of your device, completely bypassing the device's own security measures because they're targeting the network signals themselves.
Wow, okay. Lots to worry about with mobile. Finally, let's tackle the Internet of Things, IoT. This refers to all those smart devices connecting to the internet. Now, everything from smart home gadgets like cameras, thermostats, light bulbs, and voice assistants, to industrial sensors in factories, medical devices, connected cars. The list is exploding. What kind of unique risks do these devices introduce as they become more and more integrated into our homes, businesses, and critical infrastructure?
The Internet of Things is indeed a massive and rapidly expanding category. It encompasses this huge range of physical devices, vehicles, appliances, and other items embedded with electronics, software, sensors, actuators, and network connectivity, which enable them to connect and exchange data, often providing automation and remote control capabilities. As organizations increasingly integrate IoT devices into their normal business operations for efficiency, data gathering, automation, they absolutely must carefully consider the significant cybersecurity implications this rapidly expanding technology introduces. Many of these devices, especially cheaper consumer ones, were unfortunately not designed with robust security as a primary consideration.
Security was an afterthought, maybe.
Often, yes, built for functionality and low cost first.
So, what are some of the specific cyber threats related to IoT technology that we really need to be vigilant about?
Okay, there are several key concerns. One major one is simply device mismanagement. Many IoT devices come shipped with default, easily guessable usernames and passwords like admin and password. And users, unfortunately, often don't change them. This lack of basic password hygiene, combined with generally poor device management practices, like not updating firmware, significantly increases the risk of these devices being easily compromised in automated attacks. Once compromised, they can lead to the loss of critical information, like video feeds from a camera, or provide attackers with unauthorized access to other devices on the same network, including potentially the wider corporate network they're connected to.
So, change the default passwords.
Rule number one for IoT. Another risk is device spoofing, specifically for IoT. This is similar to other spoofing, but here an attacker might create an illegitimate or phony IoT device or mimic the network traffic of a legitimate one and introduce it onto a company's network. It might pose as an actual, legitimate device, perhaps pretending to be an authorized smart sensor sending fake data, or a security camera that's actually controlled by the attacker in order to gain information, disrupt operations, or gain further access to that network. It exploits the trust the network might place in its known or expected IoT devices.
And these often underpowered IoT devices can even serve as a base for launching larger attacks, can't they? Turning them into part of a digital weapons system.
Yes, absolutely. That's the risk of escalated cyber attacks. Because IoT devices are often numerous, internet-connected, and relatively insecure, they can be easily compromised en masse and then exploited as an attack base. They can be used to form huge botnets, like the Mirai botnet, to launch massive distributed denial of service (DDoS) attacks against other targets. Or they can serve as a vulnerable initial entry point for attackers trying to pivot into a more secure, connected corporate or home network. They're often the weakest link used to breach the perimeter.
This also seems to just massively expand the overall attack surface for a company or even a home network. More devices, more potential doors in.
It absolutely does. That's the expanded footprint risk. Every single IoT device, when paired or connected with other devices on a company's core network, expands the total number of potentially vulnerable endpoints under that company's purview, sometimes dramatically. Each smart light bulb, each connected thermostat, each network-enabled printer is another potential attack point that a threat actor can probe and try to exploit. It just increases the statistical likelihood of finding a vulnerability somewhere.
Given their constant internet connectivity, information theft is also a significant risk, especially if these devices are gathering sensitive personal or operational data.
Yes, definitely. Since IoT devices are, by definition, connected to the internet, and they often collect potentially sensitive data, think video feeds from security cameras, audio from smart speakers, personal health metrics from wearables, sensitive environmental readings from industrial sensors, they create a potential pathway for that sensitive data to be stolen or exploited by attackers. This is especially true because that collected data is often transmitted to and stored in cloud platforms or on other connected devices, which themselves might be vulnerable or targeted for the data the IoT device collected.
What about outdated firmware on these devices? Are they less likely to get regular security updates compared to, say, a laptop or smartphone?
That's a critical and widespread vulnerability in the IoT world, yes. Firmware is that foundational software embedded directly into the hardware of a device that controls its basic functions. Attackers can sometimes intercept insecure IoT firmware update processes to install malicious firmware instead, or, more commonly, they simply exploit known weaknesses in older, outdated firmware versions that users haven't updated often because the update process is difficult, non-existent, or the user isn't even aware it's needed.
Manufacturers don't always support them long-term either.
That's a huge problem too. Lack of long-term support and patching. A particular challenge for organizations is that employees often bring their personal IoT devices into an office environment, things like smartwatches, personal fitness trackers, maybe even smart coffee mugs these days without IT personnel being aware of them. These devices connect to the corporate Wi-Fi, potentially bypassing organizational cybersecurity defenses and introducing unknown vulnerabilities right into the heart of the network, the shadow IoT problem.
Shadow IoT, I like that. And can these often quite simple IoT devices actually get infected with malware like ransomware? You mentioned their computing power is often very limited.
Yes, surprisingly, malware is definitely a threat to IoT networks and devices, despite their limited resources. Attackers develop specialized, lightweight malware designed specifically for the constraints of IoT hardware. We've seen botnet malware like Mirai, as mentioned. We've also seen ransomware specifically targeting certain types of IoT technology, maybe locking up a smart home hub or industrial control interface, where the malware code denies access to the devices or their critical functions unless a financial payment is made by the user or owner. Even simple devices can be held hostage.
And can they be hit with those denial of service attacks like traditional networks, overwhelming them with traffic?
Yes, network attacks are a threat to IoT as well. Threat actors can launch denial of service, DoS, or DDoS attacks, specifically targeting IoT networks or individual devices, just as they can with traditional computers and servers. These attacks might aim to overburden the often limited processing power or network capacity of the IoT devices themselves with excessive traffic, rendering them useless or unresponsive. Or they might target the central control servers or cloud platforms that manage the IoT devices, preventing crucial sensor data from being transmitted or remote control commands from being received. It can effectively break entire fleets of devices temporarily.
So it's clear that understanding these emerging or rather rapidly expanding battlegrounds, cloud, mobile, and IoT, is absolutely vital for anyone trying to stay ahead or even just keep up in this ongoing digital chess game. But beyond just reacting to these specific threats and attacks, what about proactively trying to identify and mitigate risks before they can be exploited? This seems to bring us naturally to the concepts of threat modeling and understanding the overall threat landscape.
Exactly. This is where proactive strategic defense truly comes into play, shifting from a purely reactive stance, we've been breached now what, to a much more anticipatory one. What are our biggest risks and how can we design defenses against them? Threat modeling, as defined in the source, is the systematic process of identifying potential threats, analyzing the likelihood and impact of those threats, and defining measures to mitigate them, specifically concerning a network, a system, or an application, ideally during the design phase. It's fundamentally about building security into the design from the start, not just trying to bolt it on as an afterthought later.
What's the core goal of going through a threat modeling exercise? What does it truly aim to achieve for an organization?
The primary goal is really to gain a deep, comprehensive understanding of all the potential security risks that a particular system, application, or network could realistically face, considering everything from its architecture and data flows to its deployment environment and potential attackers. And then, based on that understanding, the goal is to develop appropriate security controls, countermeasures, and contingency plans before an attack actually occurs. This helps to minimize the potential impact if a risk is realized, or ideally, to prevent the attack from happening successfully in the first place. Its main benefit is that it forces companies to systematically think like an attacker, pinpointing weaknesses and vulnerabilities in their own designs that absolutely need to be addressed, ultimately leading to more inherently secure and resilient systems.
And part of that process you mentioned involves evaluating the broader threat landscape.
Mhm.
What exactly does that term encompass, and why is it considered to be constantly changing?
The threat landscape is essentially the sum total, the entire universe of potential threats and attack vectors that an organization and its IT infrastructure might face at any given time. It includes known vulnerabilities, emerging attack techniques, the motivations and capabilities of various threat actors, geopolitical factors, even industry-specific risks. And it's considered constantly changing because, well, it is. New software vulnerabilities are discovered daily. Attackers continuously develop new tools and techniques to bypass existing defenses. The motivations of threat actors shift. Maybe a new ransomware group emerges, or a nation-state focuses on a new type of espionage target. Technology itself evolves, creating new potential attack surfaces, like IoT. Because of this constant flux, it's absolutely necessary for organizations to regularly, even continuously, assess this evolving landscape. It's a highly dynamic environment, constantly shifting like sand dunes in the wind. You can't rely on last year's threat assessment.
That sounds daunting. How do organizations possibly keep up with all the new threats and vulnerabilities constantly emerging in this rapidly changing landscape? Is there a systematic way?
It is daunting, but there are ways. One crucial tool that many organizations rely on now is using threat intelligence platforms or services. These platforms aggregate, correlate, and analyze information on the latest threats, vulnerabilities, indicators of compromise, IOCs, and attacker tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, from a vast number of global sources, security vendors, researchers, government agencies, open source intelligence, dark web monitoring, etc.
So consolidated intel.
Exactly. This curated, often real-time intelligence feed helps organizations get timely, actionable information about what's happening right now in the threat landscape that might affect them. This, in turn, helps companies prioritize their own cybersecurity efforts, allowing them to focus limited resources on patching the most critical vulnerabilities first, defending against the most immediate or relevant dangers, and adjusting their security posture proactively based on current threat activity.
What specific elements should organizations be considering when they evaluate this ever-evolving threat landscape? What are the key pieces of information they need to look for and analyze?
When evaluating the landscape, you should consider several key elements. You need to look at the different attack vectors or methods being used. Are attackers currently favoring network exploits, social engineering, supply chain compromises? You need to assess the magnitude or potential impact of specific emerging threats. How damaging could this new ransomware variant or this specific vulnerability be to us? You need to understand the constantly updated list of existing vulnerabilities within your own systems and software, and cross-reference that with known exploits. And critically, you need to keep understanding the various types of threat actors we discussed earlier, their motivations, their targets, their capabilities. Are you more likely to face opportunistic ransomware gangs, sophisticated state-sponsored espionage, or maybe disgruntled insiders? Each requires a different defensive focus and strategy.
So threat modeling sounds like a very structured, almost scientific approach to anticipating and defending against these threats. What are the typical phases involved in conducting a rigorous threat modeling process?
It is indeed intended to be a systematic process, providing a kind of blueprint for building defense. The source outlines several key phases. The first phase is logically to identify assets. You need to start by taking a complete inventory and understanding the value of all the assets that require protection against potential threats. This isn't just servers, it includes sensitive data, critical applications, back-end databases, intellectual property, customer trust, employee identities, even physical equipment. You simply can't protect what you don't know you have or what you don't understand the value of.
Makes sense. Know what you need to defend. Once the assets are identified, the next step is naturally to identify threats to those specific assets.
Correct. Now you think about what could harm those assets. This includes identifying the specific threat types that are relevant, like malware, data theft, DOS, and understanding their likely characteristics. What's the attacker's probable intent? Disruption, espionage, financial gain. Their likely targeting methods. Network scan, phishing, insider collusion, and their potential attack methodologies or TTPs. It's also crucial during this phase to brainstorm and discuss realistic, plausible threat scenarios for planning purposes. Move beyond just abstract risks, we could get hacked, to concrete possibilities. An attacker could exploit vulnerability X in our web server to inject SQL code and steal customer database Y. what could actually happen here and how would it likely unfold?
And then the source mentions perform reduction analysis. This sounds technical. Is it about breaking down the system to understand its potential weak points in relation to those threats?
That's precisely what it is. This phase involves decomposing the asset or system being protected from the identified threats. The intent is to gain a deeper understanding of how the asset interacts with its environment and potential threats. You look at things like system architecture, data flows between components, trust boundaries where security levels change, interfaces, input points where data can be received, a key place for vulnerabilities, security clearances required, and any related security policies and procedures already in place. It's about understanding the internal workings, the attack surface, and potential weak points where a threat might materialize. Almost like taking apart a machine to meticulously examine how each cog and connection interacts and where it might fail under stress.
Okay, understanding the guts of the system. After understanding the threats and how they might interact with the system, the next step is to analyze the impact of an attack. This is where you try to put some numbers or at least qualifications to the potential risk, right? How bad could it really be?
This is absolutely critical for prioritization and justifying security investments. You need to try and quantify the potential financial impact of a successful attack scenario, estimating things like recovery costs, lost revenue due to downtime, potential regulatory fines, legal fees, customer notification costs. Having these potential dollar figures helps tremendously in prioritizing which risks to address first and making a business case for the necessary security controls. But beyond just the dollars and cents, you also need to consider the other qualitative effects, such as the impact on brand reputation, the loss of customer trust, potential operational shutdowns, or regulatory sanctions that might not have a direct, immediate dollar figure attached, but could be just as or even more devastating to the business's long-term viability.
Then comes the proactive step we were aiming for. Develop countermeasures and controls. This is where you actually design and implement the defenses based on everything you've learned.
Exactly. This is where the analysis turns into action. Based on the identified threats, vulnerabilities, and potential impacts, you now implement the specific security controls designed to mitigate those risks. This might involve deploying technical solutions like intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDPS, to spot and block attackers. It could involve strengthening access controls or implementing better encryption. It also includes developing comprehensive contingency and incident response plans for when, not if, an attack does occur, ensuring you know how to react. And crucially, establishing stricter security protocols and providing better security awareness training for employees. Importantly, the implementation of these countermeasures should always be prioritized based on the threats that pose the greatest calculated risk, likelihood multiplied by impact, allowing you to focus limited resources where they will have the most protective effect.
And finally, threat modeling isn't a one-time thing. It's a continuous process. Review and evaluate. Cybersecurity is never truly done, is it?
Absolutely not. Cybersecurity is never static, so your threat model can't be either. Periodically reviewing and evaluating the threat model is absolutely essential. This ensures that the model and the resulting defenses remain relevant and effective. Updates need to be made based on new risks emerging in the external threat landscape, new attack methods being seen in the wild, newly discovered vulnerabilities in the software you use, or perhaps based on changes within your own organization, like deploying new systems or changing business processes. It's an ongoing cycle of assessment, adaptation, and improvement, constantly refining your defenses as both the threat environment and your own environment evolve.
So these phases provide a very systematic framework for thinking about threats. The source also mentions there are common established threat methodologies that organizations often use to guide this process, almost like different established schools of thought or frameworks for conducting threat modeling. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, there are several well-known and commonly used methodologies or frameworks for conducting threat models. They provide structured approaches and often specific checklists or processes to ensure thoroughness. The source highlights three common ones: the PASTA, Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis, threat model; the VAST, Visual, Agile, and Simple threat model; and perhaps the most famous one, the STRIDE, Spoofing, Tampering, Repudiation, Information Disclosure, Denial of Service Attack, and Elevation of Privilege threat model.
Okay, let's start with PASTA. That's an interesting acronym. What's its particular focus, and how does it break down the threat modeling process?
PASTA is a risk-centric methodology. It consists of 7 distinct stages that specifically focus on aligning security countermeasures with business objectives and the impact of potential attacks. A key aspect is that the countermeasures are prioritized based on the calculated value of the assets being protected, focusing defensive efforts on what's most critical to the business first.
What are the 7 stages?
The 7 stages are: Stage 1, definition of objectives, DO, for the risk analysis. Stage 2, definition of technical scope, DTS. Stage 3, application decomposition and analysis, ADA. Stage 4, threat analysis, TA. Stage 5, weakness and vulnerability analysis, WVA. Stage 6, attack modeling and simulation, AMS, where you simulate attacks. And finally, Stage 7, risk analysis and management, RAM, where you analyze the results and manage the identified risks. It's a very comprehensive, risk-driven approach that aims to tie security decisions directly back to tangible business value and impact.
Okay, comprehensive. Then we have VST. The source says this one sounds like it's connected to agile software development methodologies, which emphasize flexibility and continuous improvement. How does that apply to threat modeling?
That's right. The VAST threat model is explicitly based on principles from the Agile project management methodology. Its primary goal is to integrate threat management activities seamlessly and continuously into a programming or software development environment, doing it on a scalable basis. It's designed to fit naturally within modern software development life cycles where teams work in rapid iterations. Sprints. It emphasizes things like visual modeling of threats and automated tooling to make threat modeling simpler, more repeatable, and less burdensome for busy development teams, making security part of the development flow.
Integrating it earlier. And finally, STRIDE. This one was developed by Microsoft, and its name itself is an acronym for 6 core threat concepts. It seems like it provides a very useful checklist for thinking about potential threats, doesn't it?
Precisely. STRIDE is probably one of the most widely known and used threat modeling methodologies, originally developed by Microsoft's security engineers. It's particularly useful for assessing threats related to software applications and operating systems, but its core concepts are applicable more broadly. Its name, STRIDE, is an acronym for the 6 categories of threats it prompts you to consider. Spoofing. Can someone impersonate a user or process? Tampering. Can data be modified without authorization? Repudiation. Can a user deny having performed an action? Information disclosure. Can sensitive data be exposed? Denial of service. Can the system be made unavailable? Elevation of privilege. Can an attacker gain higher permissions?
That's a great checklist.
It is. These 6 threat concepts are broad enough that they can help identify concerns related to network threats, social engineering, physical security, and more, even though STRIDE originated with a focus on applications. It provides a very useful, memorable checklist framework for systematically brainstorming potential vulnerabilities during the design or review process. It forces teams to ask those critical what-if questions across key security dimensions.
Wow. We've certainly covered an incredible amount of ground today. We've gone from the fundamental pillars of cybersecurity, that CIA triad, all the way through the incredibly intricate and varied ways attackers operate across networks, applications, hosts, the human mind, and even physical spaces. We've unmasked a diverse cast of threat actors, dissected the step-by-step cyber attack lifecycle, explored the often underestimated ripple effects of a single breach, and looked at proactive defense through threat modeling.
It really underscores the dynamic, almost living nature of this field, doesn't it? Cybersecurity isn't a static target you can just hit and be done with. It's a constantly evolving landscape of new threats emerging and new defenses being developed in response. It's this perpetual game of digital cat and mouse. Understanding who the attackers are, how they operate their TTPs, and the specific vulnerabilities in our increasingly complex and interconnected world is absolutely paramount today, for individuals just as much as for large organizations.
And for you, our listener, we really hope this deep dive has shown you that awareness, just knowing what's out there, how these things work, is truly the first and most crucial step in protecting yourself and your organization. Whether you're an individual trying to manage your personal digital footprint safely, or you're part of an organization safeguarding critical assets and customer data, simply knowing the landscape gives you power. It allows you to anticipate potential threats and respond thoughtfully, rather than just reacting in panic after something bad has already happened.
Indeed. It's all about being informed, not necessarily alarmed, but informed enough to take sensible precautions. And, as technology continues to advance at what feels like light speed, and our lives become ever more deeply intertwined with these complex digital systems, it really raises a profound question for us all to ponder as we look ahead.
What's that?
What new, currently unforeseen vulnerabilities might emerge from innovations that we haven't even fully grasped the implications of yet? Things like highly advanced artificial intelligence making decisions, the dawn of practical quantum computing breaking current encryption, or maybe even just future shifts in human behavior online, creating entirely new avenues for social engineering.
That's a big question. How can we possibly cultivate the foresight needed to anticipate and defend against threats that quite literally might not even exist yet in any tangible form? It's a challenging thought indeed for a rapidly changing digital world. Something to keep thinking about. Until next time on The Deep Dive, stay curious and try to stay secure.